Hello YouTubers, this is the fourth module in my course developing ASP.NET MVC applications, more of modern web applications that just get the job done and get you up to speed to an end product as soon as possible with the least cost possible. So the last time we were talking about controllers, and we said controllers is just everything, all kinds of functionality. The glue that puts together a model and a view is a controller. The controller is, think of it as the soul of your application. It is actually the one thing that makes your application different than any other application in the world, because within that controller is where you actually get to do something intelligent with your data. Designing models and making views, sure, why not? But controllers contain the meat of your application. So you want to make sure that the functionality that you provide stays within that controller. Some people go to the next route, to the next level, and they just create another project as a library to put in all their business logic in there, so it becomes as portable as possible, as pluggable as possible. So if they want to use it in a mobile application rather than an ASP.NET MVC application, they could just import that library or just add that reference and then start using the functionality that's already in there. We should eventually get at some point where we actually start talking about, how to organize your ASP.NET project in a way that is easy to understand and a very modulous way, so you can actually take bits and pieces and stick them to other applications, whether they are desktop applications or Windows Store applications or simply just a mobile application rather than web applications. So today we're talking about the views. So we've noticed last time when we added the cups controller, we went there and we said we're going to add a new controller, and we selected creating an MVC controller with views using entity framework. So it added a controller and views for every action within that controller using the entity framework. So let's talk a little bit about these views. You noticed that in our model of a cup, we had a cup type that's an enum, and that enum represented a property for that cup. So that property was basically an enum that programmatically got translated to a drop-down. So we went to cup, created new, here's your enum. So the enum basically is what has been translated. They call it scaffolding, meaning something that have been scaffolded, translated into UI to look like this. So this is the model here. This is your model here. It's showing the price and the type, and ASP.NET is intelligent enough to hide away the ID, because there is no ID if you are creating a new record for that particular model. So if you create something like this and you go to the details, it knows that there's no interest in that ID. So what would we do? There are a couple of things that you could do. There is a way to display certain properties or hide certain properties in a given view. We'll touch on that a little bit soon, a little bit, but we want to dig deeper into how to control your model in a way that will display, that will assure you that the view will actually match what you really have in mind. Remember that ASP.NET MVC is basically, it's a framework that is done for back-end developers that don't want to worry about the database. They don't want to worry about the front end. They just want to write back-end code, and somehow this back-end code gets translated into database tables and views without having to worry about JavaScript and CSS and all that jazz. They don't want to worry about any of that. They just want to write code that gets translated to a fully formed application without having to worry about, is this in the right place? Is this the right color? Do I need to use this JavaScript framework? Is it relevant anymore? Any of that. You don't have to worry about none of that. So how do we control the view in a way that we want it to look like? For instance, let's start with this. What if I wanted to have the price? I wanted the price to be just a number, numeric. And that number, for instance, should not exceed $100, for instance. Some people will say, oh, that's easy. We just go write in validations in JavaScript that will catch up the event of typing, and it will display a message. That, just by saying that, you have already thrown away a couple of hours of your life. So how do we do that from a back end? How do we use ASP.NET MVC framework power to control that from here? Let's start with a new model, since I don't want to waste the video time in migrations and whatnot. Let's create a class. Let's call that class anything, Apple. And let's give that class a few things. GUID, ID, property, string, name. Why are we putting name for the apple? Let's say type, apple type. Let's say type. And also what we want in there, we want something that we can control. So we want the price. So we could put decimal for price, and then say price. Now, we want to build a quick enum for that guy, so I'm just going to say enum apple type, and say, I don't know, American, Egyptian, whatever, European. If I wrote that right. I don't know if I wrote that right. European. Let's say English. And let's have this guy public, so it can be accessed by whatever scaffolding is happening there. So app type. We have, let's call it Apple type in here, and I'm intentionally doing that to show you something real quick. So if I generate right now, what's going to happen if I go and do scaffolding and .NET and all that jazz? What's going to happen is the label of the model in the view is going to be displayed like this: Apple type, one letter. I don't want that to happen. So one thing we could do is to change that. There's so many good features in ASP.NET MVC, but what I want to touch on today is the annotations. So I could go and type in display name, and that will control what the view renders off of this particular property. So I just want to say type, like this. So for this particular property, the display name will show up like this. Or you know what, let's have it something really different. Let's say apple kind, origin. Let's say origin, where this apple is coming from. So in the back end, I'm calling it apple type for whatever reason. I don't know why would anyone choose to have names on the front end that's different than the back end. There are cases where that makes sense. There are cases it doesn't, and it will confuse other developers who are trying to use your application. But what matters here is that I want to show you how this powerful tool will translate that. The other thing is, let's say I don't want to write validation in JavaScript to verify the price. I want to write my own thing. So what I can do is there is an easy way to control, how much, what kind of it. So we could say the range that I want this value to be within. Here's data annotations again. That could be Let's say the minimum is $1. Can't put $0 in there. The maximum is $50 for one apple. I don't know what kind of apple that is, but sure, why not? And then, not just that, I could display an error message that says the apple inserted is not in a valid range. I'm writing back-end code. I'm not touching JavaScript. I'm not touching the view. I'm not doing none of that. I'm just putting here the rules that I think should govern this particular model when it's being scaffolded and rendered as a view on the front end. Cool. Let's get rid of the old database, if I still have that in here. Probably I do. I don't want to go through migration right now. I don't want to confuse you. We'll just start from scratch. All right. You have an Apple model. Let's go ahead and rebuild that. All right. And let's go build a controller. Exact same things we did in the past. I want this guy, and I will show you something very interesting. These controllers, somehow they find the plural of whatever model you have. So if you say person, it will say people controller. In this case, it will say Apple's controller. I'll show you right now. So if my class is Apple, see down there, it says Apple's controller. It's very effective. It's awesome. I love it. All right, so it will add a context for me without me having to add that. And it'll just go ahead and create views and whatever. And we'll see how cool the view is for this one. Just like last time, we had a problem with, I don't know, similar namespace. So I'm just going to do that real quick. Is it models? Models, right? We use the namespace, something like that. We could do that too, but sure. Let's go ahead and check out what happened. Check this out. All right. So we have now we created a Apple's controller. This inevitably will go to actually Apple's/index, right? Because index is the default value, if you just put apples in your route, it'll just go to apples directly. So let's see how it's gonna build that. So it build the database, and just like we said last time. So if I create new, if I put price A, for instance, like this, look at this. This field price must be a number. Why it must be a number? Implicitly in your model, you've already said, I want a value that is of a range from 1 to 50, right? But that's not the original message that we put in there. What if we put an actual number? Let's say I put 300. The apple inserted is not in a valid range. I meant the apple price, but look, the apple inserted is not in a valid range. So it built in the validation JavaScript jazz for you without you having to touch anything on the front end. All you had to know is just how to write back-end good code, and you had to manage your models in the way that you think should be looking like. That's it. Look at that. So what else did we put in there? We said the display name of the Apple type needs to look like this, origin. So even though, oops, I opened up IntelliJ by mistake. Sorry about that. Even though the dropdown, the enum that I have in here is actually of the type Apple type, I bet if we go look in here, it will say Apple type somewhere. There it is. Look, the name of the field itself is really Apple type. However, because I wanted the front end to say origin, it just did that. So that's how much control. Didn't touch the front end in anything. I didn't touch JavaScript in anything. Didn't have to include libraries, add libraries, or install libraries, whatever people do these days. So that's one part. What other powers could we have out of this? Let's check this out. There's also, you could, if you're passing in a string, you could go about and say, let's put a few fancy things in here. Let's go and say, I don't know what, seller, maybe, string, vendor. So I want to control this. I don't want to put a text box out there that is open for any kind of text. I don't want someone to put a vendor name that is an entire book. And an open text box will let you do that. So we want to control that. So we could do something like string length. And string length will let you do a few nice things. You want the maximum not to be more than 100 characters, and we want to add a minimum length at some point here. I wonder if we could just do minimum length. Yep, minimum length is 0. Now we don't want it to be 0. It needs to be at least like 20 characters because it's a vendor name. Maybe 10 characters, 5, whatever, 5 characters. And you still could add an error message, and it doesn't matter in what order you want to add your things. You could add them in any any way you like. So I want to add here error message, vendor cannot be less than 5 characters, right? Something like this. Very similar to the range part. What other powers you could do from a view perspective? You could control, let's see, you could actually control on the database side. You could control what needs to be scaffolded. So let's say I don't want the vendor to be scaffolded in here. So if I want to say, do I want this guy to be scaffolded? False. So that means that this guy will not be displayed in the database. This is a hidden field that will always be added through the controller. Will never be displayed. What else? What are optional and what are not optional on your model? Right? So let's take that guy away because we definitely want that to be there. But since we have these rules in here, let's add another one. Another string. Let's say, let's call it local seller. Here's a get, here's a set. And let's say here that the display name is seller. But not just that, I want that to be required. So just by me typing this, that means that you can't leave that empty. I don't care what kind of data you're going to put in there, but you can't leave that part empty. So let's go ahead and see if our stuff, I wonder if required, I could just put a message in there, like an error message. Yes. Sorry, but this field cannot be left empty. Like this. Cool. I need to close that parenthesis. Like this. Alright, let's throw away the stuff that we generated. And let's start over. Boom. I don't want Apple's controller. And I also don't want to add, I have malware on my computer. No, I don't. It's just a weird OneDrive thing. Where is my thing? There it is. There we go. All right, let's build our project. Let's start over. Let's see how these things are going to show up. Pretty cool stuff. You're not writing, you thought I'm going to talk about views. You thought I'm going to talk about some new JavaScript framework. Nope, that's not what I'm doing right now. It's just back-end code. That's all you need to do. Let's go to controllers, add controller, no controller. apples add. Great. Let's put the namespace in here. I've chosen a better name than app context. Apparently it's being shared by other libraries, by other classes. All right, let's run our app. Let's match what we've learned, what we've done in our model, to what actually has been implemented. So I'm going to split the screen here. And I'm going to go to apples. And I want to go to my model. See, I added a bunch of things. There we go. So it's showing vendor, price, seller. Let's test these. So this is called origin, and this is called seller, even though it's called local seller, because I want it to look like this on the front end. Now let's test this. We're gonna start with the vendor, and we're gonna say the rule here was that we can't have something that is more than 100 characters and less than 5 characters, inclusive. So I'm gonna put something that's less than 5 characters. Let's say, ABC. Boom. Validation just happened on the fly. I don't care what JavaScript is happening behind this. If I really want to dig into it to do something that's extraordinary, fine. But if I'm building an app just really quick that I want it to get it out there, there it is. So if I say ABCDE, suddenly it's gone. Now, same thing goes for the price. Say it's $25. So if I say $1, that's still fine. If I say $0, that's not cool. So I'm going to say $15. Now the seller, I'm going to leave the seller intentionally empty, and I'm just going to move on. The seller is required. So if I go like this, say, sorry, but this field cannot be left empty. It won't nag you about the field being empty unless it knows for sure that you're going to submit this form. Because sometimes you're trying to fill different things, so you're jumping between fields, just tap, 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 tap. But in this case, it knows for a fact, as soon as you click create, that you really are intending to leave this field empty. So it freaks out and it gives you this message. One more thing about the views. If you want to go to the next level with the views, these views are built around Bootstrap. Bootstrap is basically a beautiful framework that comes in with all beautiful kind of stuff. For instance, let's say you don't like that create button in here, right? Let's go find, this is the view for create action. How do I get to that view? Very simple. If I go to the Apple's controller, and if I go to the create view, I could just right click and say go to view, and it'll just take me there. Come on, there it is. It's very straightforward HTML that you could, and don't freak out with the red stuff, it'll just go away in a second. There it is. So this is the create button, right? You could change that on the fly. I'll show you that right now. So this create button, it's button default. It's a bunch of classes that Bootstrap does. And the beautiful thing about Visual Studio, it'll just, drop down list, and it'll show you what's the available. So if I choose button info and save that, it should. I didn't restart my project. My project is still running. Do I need to refresh? Maybe. There it is. See how that changed your button? I could also, what else? I could do really cool stuff with the kind of groups that are in here. I could change labels. So let's say we have a label, we have an h2 in here. Let's say class label danger. Save. This should affect the word create in here. So let's refresh that guy. Right away, boom, it just happened. So where do we get the knowledge? But that's just if you want to go to that next level of trying to make your app look pretty. So you're just going to have to change things that are already generated. So ASP.NET MVC, the scaffolding feature in that framework, already generated that cool stuff for you. You just want to add the last touches. Cool. Where do we learn about Bootstrap? Bootstrap. Just go online, go to Bootstrap, learn about the cool things that are in there. Let's see. There are components. There are a bunch of icons that you could call in and drop downs like that. What else? You could just know the name of things and it'll just figure it out for you. Right? Find the name of things and it will figure it out for you. What is that? It's called button group drop up. Let's try that one out. Button group drop up. If I go here, button group drop up. I know it needs more properties. We just want to see how it looks like with this one little whatever. Button group drop up. And then we need buttons inside of that. And this is a div class. Interesting. Let's try that out. So this button that we have here is just going to be a part of other things. Let's try that out. I like that. Div button class button group drop up. Drop up, close, new div, throw this guy in there, change that to button, right? And I don't know, is that enough? We'll see. Yeah, something. I put a label here. Create. There we go. What else do I need to get that little thing? The caret. I have to add a span in there. Okay. So if I add a span, what does that do to me? There it is. What else? Another span. Maybe some default button in here in addition to our actually existing button that we really care about. All of that. And we're going to close that with a button. KD, refresh. I have two buttons now. Great. There it is. Now, how did they get their button to have the same color? It's their button right there. Oh, that's the drop up. Drop up. Oh, it is actually in. Okay, I see. So So the actual button that we were trying to copy its code is this guy. It actually has these things. Cool. Sounds good. I have no problem with that. So that's that. You could just add whatever controls if you really have to. If you don't, the app will allow you to, the generated ASP.NET MVC code will actually allow you to have basic controls, and you have to ask yourself the question, or whoever you're building that application for, the question, do we really want to go into another level into designing whatever? Do we want to add more bells and whistles around my application? So that's really it. Play around a lot with annotations, because this is how you control your view. You can control your view. All the rules about your view are controlled from here. You can even control your database from here by actually telling the database what data type you want to have in there. But this is not a part of this module. See, I could say this is a date, this is a credit card, whatever, or email. You could actually go and say this is an email address. So validate. You know, a few years ago, I remember spending so much time with a certain team at a certain client, you know, trying to figure out the perfect way. What is the perfect regex for validating an email field? And it's a lot of work, and there is so many theories around it, and there are so many different email formats that could go right or left. Instead of doing all that, it's just 1 second where you just type in, this is an email address. And if it sees it as an email address, it will try to go through and figure out, you know, the best way. You could even add like your own error messages. This is not an email. The email format should be some info at whatever, Hassan.com, whatever. Just like that. That's what views are all about. Remember that ASP.NET MVC, again, as I said that at the beginning of this module, is very focused on a group of developers that were raised and introduced to the computer science or the software development world through back-end programming. Think of the folks that started learning programming by writing console applications, not the folks that started programming by writing JavaScript applications. For these particular group, which is a very, very vast majority of software developers, very seasoned developers out there, this is the right solution for you if you really don't want to go the route of, you know, learning this library or that library in JavaScript. That's pretty much it. Thank you for watching. See you next week.